everyone. We're going to get started. Come on in and take a seat. Good morning, everyone. We have reached the last session for the conference. This is Sustainable Materials Management and Innovative Recycling Initiatives. I am super excited about this session. We have some fantastic speakers. Certainly a world I'm very interested in, organics and tires. I don't know about you guys, but at the state level, we struggle with getting organics recycled at a rate we would like to. We generate quite a bit of organics in the state. We're recycling about 63% of our yard trash, which is fantastic, but our food waste, we're only recycling about 4%. Certainly room for growth there. In tires, we're actually recycling about 44% in the state. So again, certainly room for growth. Excited to hear about what our speakers have to say. So I'm going to invite Dan Collins up, and he'll tell us a little bit about composting and how to control our odor emissions.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for showing up here this morning. Can I see hands of any golfers today? Anybody golfing? Any golfer that's here, I was told by Gene, first par 5, put an eagle on the card because you showed up to this session. So I like to start out just talking about odors, but I'll relate it to you guys golfing. How is your golf swing? Does it stink? What are you going to do if you have a bad golf swing? You're going to need to adapt. Why do you have a bad golf score? Maybe you have bad equipment. The same could be true if you have an odorous facility. So right away, I'll get into, gotta go back. Why do odors happen? People make bad decisions. Maybe they didn't choose the proper equipment for the food waste or the organic matter that they have chosen to compost at their facility. So making a bad decision typically stems from cost. So for me, when I think about what does odor cause, it's a nuisance. For me, it causes heartburn. You know, if I get an odor complaint at a facility that I've helped design or work at, it's going to mean that I'm a bad neighbor. Something isn't right at the facility. It could cause me in getting fines. It could cause the facility in getting shut down for a day, a week, or maybe permanently. We see those things happen. It's going to drive your costs up because you have to correct that odor problem. And of course, if you have an odor issue and you're near a neighborhood or businesses that are complaining, you're going to lose their trust, and future operators who want to have a compost facility in the area, it could potentially damage their opportunities. So I like to talk about proactive versus reactive management. So what can you do if you are a new compost facility? Send your folks out for training. That's the first thing you should do. Get everybody trained. You yourself go through USCC's composting training 101 class. It's terrific. You could bring in a subject matter expert. Maybe you're going to compost biosolids. Bring in a biosolids expert. Maybe you're going to do food waste or anaerobic digestate. Talk to somebody that has the expertise to help you so you don't choose the wrong technology. 3, this is near and dear to my heart, employ an environmental management program. We really don't hear much about that in the compost industry, but I come from a wastewater background. And I from a biosolids standpoint, I help folks employ an environmental management program. What that's going to help you do is help you set strategic goals, bring those up to management, because it's going to help you get the technology that you need. It's going to help you set goals and objectives. It's going to help you with public perception, public acceptance, and you're also going to be talking to your stakeholders about what's going to make them happy. So if you're building a compost facility and you bring in the public and you say, hey, what's going to make you happy? The first thing they're going to tell you is, we don't want to see it, we don't want to smell it. So those are things that are really important. And also you need to have some kind of odor minimization plan, odor impact minimization plan. So how are you going to handle that? And always keep in mind that first impressions are lasting impressions, right? So how do you want to be viewed? Do you want to just be viewed as some kind of recycling facility? You're not too interested in what maybe the community has to say? We see that too. Believe it or not, bad management is everywhere. Or do you want to be viewed as somebody that's creating a nice compost product? Reactive management, this pulls from a workshop that I do often with auditors. It's showing people that if you react early, when you have an issue, your costs are going to remain low. If you wait to address an odor issue, your costs are just going to go straight up. You may end up getting, your name in the media, which is never good. Maybe there's some kind of regulation change that's going to take place simply because you were a bad neighbor or you have a bad operation. So what are odors? What are they? How are they regulated? Well, we all know odors are a very distinct smell, something that's unpleasant. So are they regulated? Yes and no. Odors can be related to, it's volatile organic compounds such as sulfur, nitrogen compounds, and other malodorous compounds that are going out into the atmosphere. While there's no set regulations, there are definitely things in the works. Karen could probably speak to it better than I can, where fence lines are being established for odor units. So there's different ways of measuring the odor unit, but we're starting to see regulations for fence lines. How do you measure odors? Well, the nose knows. You guys know if you go into somewhere, it doesn't smell good, you know. And then there's some things that are a little bit more sophisticated, like the nasal ranger. So it'll help identify the compounds that are out there in the atmosphere around your site. Excuse me. And then you can send samples of your material to a lab, and they could do an odor panel. And then once you set a benchmark, one of the things I really like are higher technologies such as the Odor Watch, where if you put these around your site, if once you cross a threshold of odor units, it'll automatically let you know that, hey, you have an odor problem. Then of course there's maybe some of the older technology that's still in use today is the flux chambers, FID analyzers, and chimney chambers. So they'll go on top of a compost heap, take those measurements, send them out to the lab, or even do spot analyzing. Same thing with drone technology. These two are the most sophisticated that I've seen. Maybe you guys know of more, let me know. But drone technology that actually flies around a facility and can tell you how much methane is in a certain area. So it pulls samples. Same thing with the robotic dogs that kind of walk around a site, no Dobermans, just these robotic dogs that could do spot sampling. So it's pretty interesting. But it's great to have the data, but how are you going to use the data? So what we see is we've hired consulting firms to come in, take all the data we have. Somebody's trying to open up a new facility. Maybe they're going to put it into some kind of odor modeling software, and they can compare the technologies to determine what the fence line is for each of those technologies. So it's going to help you choose whatever technology better fits your desires. Again, how do odors travel? Odors travel in a couple different ways. I like to say it's an odor river or a pickup and plop. So not very scientific, right? But odors kind of meander. They follow contours. And, just a narrow band of odors traveling. I worked in wastewater treatment plant and an internet expressway, an expressway right by our facility. We get odor complaints. We knew a very specific area where people would drive through, and you probably experienced this too. You're on a road, you smell something, 10 seconds later, you don't smell it anymore. So that's just the way the odors are traveling off of your site. Pick up and plop, that's a very important one to understand. We see this all the time. I have a site in an area where when it's wet, when it's high humidity, they get odor complaints from a certain area. Basically what happens is the seasonal temperatures, maybe it's morning or evening, the odors will go up and they'll travel a mile and then drop down on this residential area, and then these folks get odor complaints. So we have to keep in mind that wind direction, prevailing winds, and storm events can impact how the odors are traveling. The other one is, I'll get a call, hey, we had an odor complaint, can you come help us out? Can you come take a look? And say, we have a little odor here, we have a little odor there. And I always say, a little odor plus little odor can equal big odor. So you need to keep in mind, you need to understand your facility as a whole, that you have a lot of areas in a compost facility that you need to identify that could have potential for you to have some heartburn. So let's take a look at that. So in any compost facility, if I had an environmental management program instilled, I would have what you call critical control points. And I can look at my process and I can say, okay, one critical area would be the entrance to my facility. I have loads of food waste or biosolids or yard waste coming in. What potentially could happen there to have an environmental impact or negative impact on my surroundings? 2, what's my receiving area look like? Am I going to receive indoors or outdoors? How am I mixing? What is my mix ratio? All of these things impact odors. And then, of course, the dark area there, in this picture is like phase 1 of a composting facility. The light green is phase 2. Then you have your screening, your storage. All of these areas are critical control points. And if you identify each of those separately, you could manage each one of those critical areas separately too, with different procedures, different corrective action plans, different ways of what in this area could contribute to an odor issue. Let's go back to the entrance of a facility. You may have a gate. First thing in the morning, trucks are sitting there lined up your gate before you even open because those trucks like to get on the road early. You got a leaky truck. He's got food waste that's just full, got a lot of moisture in it, and it's coming out that tailgate. Or biosolids might be leaking out the back. It's not your problem. That's the truck hauler's problem. But who's going to get that call when somebody drives down the road, sees the truck, smells the truck? They're going to come after you. So basically, a leaky truck on hot pavement equals bad odors. I like to say that. So you need to get a hold of that trucking company, tell them, hey, let's get that tailgate fixed. So you got to have corrective actions right away. So is that to do? A don't is do nothing. We see that a lot. Oh, it'll just go away. We'll talk to the guy maybe. It's all about the tipping fees anyway. So and then we need to understand what's coming in. So critical control area number 2 might be what's coming in, your food waste, your yard waste, source separated organics. This happens to be some of the cleaner materials that you might see in a site. Very low contamination. You've got your food waste on the upper right-hand side there. You've got fruits and vegetables coming in, not a lot of contamination there. Another load of primarily, it looks like compostables on the lower right, but that's pretty clean material. Then you may have material coming in a slurry, or you may have fruits and vegetables coming in post-consumer that's, they try to separate it, but it's got a lot of contamination in. So what do? You either put it through some kind of depackaging equipment, or you have people out there manually picking out contamination from your feedstock. What I like about the picture on the left is it's hard to see, I think, but there is a pile of structured material behind it, wood chips or overs, that this particular company is going to mix and blend and cover that food waste as soon as they're done with that sorting. And that's important because the longer your material sits on the ground without being treated, the longer it has to generate odors, right? Same thing can be said for biosolids, whether you're treating a low solid product, whether it's can be sludge, whether it's raw primary, it doesn't matter. You need to, when that material comes in, don't leave it sitting overnight. Let's get it mixed with the feedstock, and then let's get it covered with some wood chips. Wood chips are your first line of defense by having it covered to prevent odors. So we need the structured material anyway, right? So we talked about that. Compost 101, you have to have the proper C to N ratios. You have to have the proper porosity in your compost heap. So you have to have it coming in anyway. So let's make sure that you have it near your dumping area or your receiving area of your feedstock. Well, what can be composted? You're in an area where you just know recycling has to occur. There's all types of feedstocks. We talked about biosolids and food waste, but what about all kinds of mortalities from animals? What about their manures? There's lots of different ways to utilize composting for success. So the last but not least is probably, in my opinion, one of the worst smelling feedstocks, aquaculture. So you got shellfish, you got fish, you've got seaweed and sargassum. Sargassum is becoming another issue in Florida. What do we do with it? Once we get past the arsenic issue and how to handle the arsenic, I think you're gonna see a lot of compost being generated from seaweed. Not only the arsenic, but from what I'm hearing is the sand can be an issue too, so you almost have to wash it first. So just something else that we can some we could compost. Anaerobic digestate. That's very odorous by nature simply because it's coming out of an anaerobic without air process. So it has odor to begin with, very high. Once you start mixing it and pushing air through it, odors are even greater. So you need to mix that and get that covered as soon as you can. And then municipal solid waste organics, which we don't do a lot of here in the US. It's very popular in Europe. We're starting to see some bio-drying going on in the US, but you could definitely compost some MSW, but you still have a lot of the other waste stream that you have to handle on the back end. And then, of course, you have some liquid streams as well. We're just now seeing a lot of folks in the Midwest getting into septage residuals, which I don't want to say surprises me, but composting septage is one thing, and composting biosolids is another. Biosolids is highly regulated already. Septage, I always advise someone that's composting septage that make sure you get a lot of source testing done because you're only as good as what's coming in. So if it's full of contamination, you're going to want to know that before you make the compost and think you can sell it. So before you decide I'm going to open up a facility and I'm going to compost septage, make sure you know what's in that septage. Okay, so how are you going to receive your material? We talked a little bit about this. You have your entrance, but once it's inside your gate, what are you going to do? You might receive it outdoors. That's great. So if you're going to receive it outdoors, you have to have a plan to cover it with that structured material right away. So make sure you're ready to go. Again, outdoors, same thing with biosolids. Have an area set up, biosolids get dumped, your structured material is there right away. I'm gonna mix it, I'm gonna cover it, I'm gonna keep my odors down. Then of course you could receive indoors. This is a great option if you have neighbors nearby, simply because you're gonna have a biofilter on that building and you're gonna knock those odors down with a biofilter or some other kind of chemical scrubbing. But with all things, you still need to have your structured material there where you can mix and cover. Another way to go indoors is open-ended, just canopy areas. We see that a lot too. This facility employs both. They're receiving, they're mixing, and they're doing their primary composting in a full enclosed building. Then secondary composting they're doing in a coverall area, we'll call it, and then they move it to their final area of screening and storage. All those areas are controlled, so you're not having much of an odor issue there. This is one of my favorite pictures because it's showing best management practices all across the board. They've got their biofilter inside the building. They're tipping inside there with the trucks. They're mixing. The loaders are ready to go to get it mixed right away. And then you see a water truck there. That water truck has two functions, in my opinion. They're keeping dust down because people smell with their eyes. So if you have dust flying around or garbage flying around, people are going to say that you have odor. They're going to find something wrong with you. Two, we talked about those leaky trucks. So if trucks are leaking, backing into the building, they have a means to wash it down right away. So also on top of the building, you see a windsock there that they can tell which wind direction they're going in order to mitigate any kind of odor complaints. I don't know if everybody knows what air pollution control devices are, such as a biofilter. But basically, it's a means to take that air from inside of a building, and you're pushing that air through filter media, and the treatment time in that filter media is going to reduce those odorous compounds, and it's going to exit much cleaner air. Some folks even employ their biofilters inside of another building with another scrubber for an added layer of protection. And then we have the whole composting process. When you look at, like I said, I have 7 critical control points, as I call them here, from feedstock recovery to the composting, storage, and packaging, if you're going to bag it. But today I only want to talk about feedstock preparation and composting themselves. So you're going to have odors or not have odors based on your mixed recipes, your porosity, your C to N ratios. If you have those things correct, you're going to be okay. If you start to short cycle your treatment time, you may get odors. If you try to bulk it up too little, which we see a lot, and I fully understand that. The less wood chips that you have to blend with your food waste or your biosolids, the more efficient you're going to be. Same thing with cutting your treatment time down from, if you're open windrow, from let's just say 16 weeks down to 8 weeks, you could potentially have odors. So it's really important to understand your feedstock preparation and the type of composting process you've chosen. In this slide, really quickly, I like to compare composting to the fire triangle. Fire triangle, you have fuel, you got heat, and you have oxygen. If you want to get rid of a fire, you got to take out one of those three, right? So if you get rid of the oxygen, the fire's going to go away. You get rid of the fuel, fire's going to go away. Same can be true in upsetting a compost facility, except there's, the trapezoid, not a triangle. If your C to N ratio is wrong, if you're not pumping enough air or don't have enough moisture, you're going to have odor. So it's really important to keep a stable process, keep those things where you want them to be, follow your process, which we'll talk about right now. So some people might use a smart device in order to tell them, okay, we've been in this process for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we can move it to another phase. Or it's been 16 weeks, we can move it over to screening. Follow your process. Whatever it is that you establish that works for you, keep to that process. It could be a Gantt chart. It could be some kind of whiteboard where you have, magnets on it that shows, hey, this heap is in week 2, week 3. Whatever it is that works for you, make sure you follow that process. Don't veer away from that. This article was pulled from Biocycle magazine back in 2019, and I haven't seen anybody say it better than Dr. Clarence Galucki. Basically, what he said is the greatest exaggerations are in the form of claims that exceed the potential of biological reactions. And that, in this regard, the major abuse is with respect to the speed of the process. Composting is a biological process. If you try to speed it up and you short cycle it, you're going to have odors. You may, and it's not your fault, right? I like to say it's just a bad decision being made. Maybe you were doing all yard waste for a decade or two, and now there's this big push to start composting food waste. So, yeah, we can do that. We'll mix it. We'll marry the two. Well, food waste is its own animal. It has a lot of odor. So, you need to choose the technology that works for the feedstocks that you're bringing in. So, if you were doing all yard waste, it was taking you 16 weeks or whatever to compost it. Now you're bringing in food waste, and you're saying, well, now I've got a lot of material on my site. I only have 10 acres. Now I'm trying to put 20 pounds of material into a 5-pound bag. You're going to short cycle your process. You're going to try to get more done in a shorter time because you have more material. Don't do it. It's just going to give you a headache. And that's all going to drive you towards your technology selection. I've seen open windrow facilities that are treating the most ugly of materials, chicken waste or fish waste. You think they would stink. No, they stick to their process. They know it's going to take time. So these open windrow facilities don't have much of an odor. They're sticking to best management practices for their site, and they're successful. However, if you have neighbors that are encroaching, developments that are getting closer and closer to your facility, you might want to go with something a little more sophisticated, an ASP or something covered, a biolayer cover or an engineered membrane. Or if you're really on top of somebody, maybe you are required to have a building. Maybe you're going to do tunnel composting or some kind of engineered in-floor aeration inside of a building. So all those play a factor into your technology selection. But last but not least, you have to have a water management plan. Water is a killer at every compost facility, because if you're not managing your water on your facility, whether it be where you're receiving, because material is going to leach water, if it sits, you're going to have a problem. Same thing in the compost process. If you're not collecting that leachate or managing the leachate, if it's commingling with stormwater, you're going to have odor. So just keep in mind that you have to have stormwater ponds, maybe you have a leachate pond, and ideally it'd be great if you could separate the two, because anywhere where you have odor, you have problems. So one way to handle stormwater is to have it running one way, and you have some kind of separation mechanism where you're settling the solids out, and then you have a bioswale or some kind of waterway to, in the end, after it's aerated and separated, you're getting that material out to a river or a sound. So in summary, how do you want to be viewed? Do you want to be viewed as a waste facility, or do you want to be viewed as a high-quality compost site? When you go grocery shopping and you have 2 stores to choose from, you're going to want to go get your groceries from a nice, clean, bright store. You're not going to want to go where there's trash flying around, it's just dirty. Same thing can be true for composting. Keep your site clean. Where there's a drop-off, make sure it's clean. Where people are picking up your product, make sure it's clean. A nice, clean, tidy facility is great in the public eye. If you are a dirty facility, you're going to, at some point, be shut down. You're going to be closed, shut down. It's going to cost you a lot of money to get back up. It's going to cost you a lot of time to gain that public trust once again. So positive facilities that I've been associated with, a lot of them have a demonstration program where they show people how to compost. They even have educational programs where maybe they're growing vegetables, or in this case, pumpkins with their compost, just to show what can be done. So kids are a great means to reach out to the public. And an environmental management program, as I've stated earlier, will help you with all of these different things to establish best management practices, public perception, public outreach. It's all very valuable. And in the end, it's inevitable, no matter how good you are, that you're going to have an odor issue at some point in time. You know, it's just a fact in the compost business. The winners, the ones who are victorious, they hit it head on. Get out in front of the problem. Send your folks out, do odor patrol to find out, where did the odor occur. So you want to be investigative in-house. You want to communicate, hey, internally and externally, what the problem is, and how you're going to correct it, and how you're going to ensure that that problem doesn't happen again. So what's your corrective action plan? And communicate it. You know, your community is going to want to know that when they talk, you listen. So, and like I said earlier with the whole yard waste, bringing in food waste, if you do that, maybe you need to adapt. Maybe you need to change your operating plan. So maybe you go from an uncovered technology to a covered technology or a tunnel technology or something like that. So you need to be able to adapt with the changing in times. So with that, I'm open for any questions.
Take questions now, or you want to wait?
It's up to you.
Does anyone have any burning questions for Dan right now?
Tomorrow, there's another talk right at the end again on VOC and greenhouse gas emissions. So hopefully I'll see you there too.
Thank you. So just by show of hands, how many of you all in the room actually deal with organics or manage or process? Anyone in the room? I'm just curious. Have you guys had to deal with odors in the past? And yeah, you have to deal with the smell. Yeah. And being at the state level, we do get a lot of the neighbor complaints. So what Dan was discussing is very important, and certainly come up and talk to Dan if you have questions, because again, if not, we're going to get the complaints and we're going to come see you. So please talk with Dan. So with that, we are changing our topic slightly. We are now going to talk about tires, treading new ground in the tire policy. So I'd like to welcome up Stratton Kirton of Liberty Recycling.
Hey everyone. So my presentation is going to be a little bit different from some that we've seen. I work in corporate affairs, so I tend to focus on the space between the public and the private, particularly with the focus on illegal dumping, getting more tires into the flow, and moving rubber up the food chain. I've tried to include some stuff about how as an industry we've made progress so that it's applicable hopefully to what you do. Although at the end of this, worst case scenario, you'll have my contact information and you'll have somebody to yell at next time you see tires on the side of the road. All right, so who is Liberty? Who do I work for? We're the only coast-to-coast tire recycler in the United States. We handle about 215 million tires every year. But for our purposes here today, why that is important is because, not unlike a lot of industries, policy in our space has been pretty stagnant for 35 years. We get to draw on what we have seen in all 50 states and in Canada, and then peers and countries around the world, to figure out what are best practices, what are best regulations, and what are updates to state laws to address those things that I said: illegal dumping, more tires into the flow, and moving rubber up the food chain. So this is a bit about us. We collect, we process, we manufacture, and we supply feedstock. But the one thing I really want to emphasize is that number in the top right-hand side is our number of customers. The U.S. produces an enormous amount of scrap tires every year, whether you have to deal with them or you just have fleet vehicles or you just take your car or truck to a retailer. You probably deal with this every year. We produce one scrap tire per person per year, which means over 300 million coming off the roads every single year. That's over 7 billion pounds. That's enough to circle the earth end to end around the equator 5 to 6 times every single year. And the same reason that we like tires when they're on our car, that they're durable and they're meant to last a long time, is exactly why they're difficult to recycle. So for us, collecting them requires an enormously huge logistical challenge. So I'm going to do a quick guide to where we've been on tires, and don't worry, I have lots of pictures and charts. Where we've been on tires and where we're going. So as recently as the mid-1990s, the US had about 1 billion with a B tires on the ground. That's not in landfills, that's just sitting in stockpiles around the US. Tires are hard to set on fire, but when they do catch on fire, they're impossible to put out. And if you remember from the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, almost every state had some sort of huge tire fire, and they typically take literally months to put out. They put out like pyrolytic oil from the tires that will come out at hundreds of gallons an hour. And then, so I live in Maryland, we own property in Virginia too. There was a huge fire near where I live. That one took 9 months to clean up, 20 years to remediate, and $25 million to remediate. So they're a problem when they're on the ground, and the reason they start stacking up in the first place is landfills don't want them because they're difficult to manage. They capture methane, so they float, so it's hard if you try to seal a landfill with them, and they take up airspace. And as landfill space has gotten more and more valuable, landfills are looking at, like, why am I gonna take tires for $50 a ton when I could do municipal solid waste or C&D or something else for a lot more? And as a proof point on that is, Alabama is the only state within 1,000 miles that still allows whole tire landfilling in the southeast. That's phasing out in 2 years. Even with it still allowed, a few years ago, there were only 3 landfills that would take tires. Today, there's only 1. Even left without any regulation restricting it, landfills don't want them. So laws were put in place mostly between 89 and 91, and they were focused on getting those tires off the ground. And the good news is they did a good job. We have less than 50 million tires sitting on the ground today. The overwhelming majority of those are represented by Texas and Colorado for some unique reasons. Most states have less than 1 million tires on the ground. 97% of tires are managed successfully, which just means they get to some sort of legal disposal. It might not be recycling, but they're at least shredded and put in a landfill. I already mentioned 300 million a year. Our industry at the end of the day is driven by disposal rules. The only states that don't have disposal rules around tires tend to be those Great Plains states where you have that combination of low population, lots of space. And the result is we are actually one of the the highest recycled commodities in the US today, industry average around 79%. Now, you heard Karen say Florida's at 44%, and there is a lot of variation in the states. Connecticut, 99%. California, 50%. Maybe surprisingly, Texas at 80%. A lot has to do with in markets, and then because tires are bulky and expensive and they're a commodity, is transportation. The further you have to take them, the less economical that business is. So the good news is tire recycling is growing. But what you might notice is, 7% over 10 years isn't very quick. You can also see it dips, it's uneven. And then when you look at the number of tires coming off the road, you can see those are growing 3 times the rate of tire recycling. So tires actually used to have a recycling or beneficial use rate of over 90%, but that gap has opened up because of these 2 data points. And these are trends that we can't change, right? 1 scrap tire per person per year. We have more vehicles in our households. Those vehicles are heavier. We have all-wheel drive vehicles and EVs. All of those contribute to both larger tires and more tires coming off the road. So what do we do about that? Real quick, just because tires are managed at the state level, just a quick overview. There are essentially only 3 systems. There's free market with a state fee, which means typically between $1 and $2. It's a pre-disposal fee. There's the same system, just without that state fee. It just means whatever they do for their program, they pay through annual appropriations. And then there's a public hybrid system, almost exclusively in the Southeast, where counties actually sit in the middle. That system tends to be really different, because in those first 2 systems, vast majority of tires go from retailer, auto shop, car dealer, directly to recycler. In those yellow ones, the counties actually end up being the destination for almost all the tires, and then those have to go to a recycler from there. And then I can talk about Connecticut's implementing EPR. If somebody really wants to talk about that, I can. It's not in place yet. But the important thing to know about this is, in a state like Florida, which is $1, or Georgia, which is $1, Alabama, $1, that pre-disposal fee you pay actually does not pay for any tire recycling at all. You'll typically see 2 fees on there. a retailer fee, which in Florida we've surveyed can be anywhere from $1 to $10. Your tire retailer sets that themselves, and then the state fee. Most of the state fees tend to pay for the things around the private sector, typically state staff, enforcement, if they have grant programs or incentives, anything like that. But I'll talk about a little bit later, most of that money actually goes to completely unrelated things. Okay, so every state is unique, but I like to figure out frameworks if I'm gonna work in all 50 states in Canada for where to focus. They all have similarities on what is currently struggling in their system. As I mentioned, our company is the largest. We're the only coast-to-coast recycler, tire recycler. We're 25 years old. These laws were put in place between 35 years and 40 years ago. So when states passed these laws, they didn't have anybody to sort of learn best practices from. It was a guess. Next, as I mentioned, they were designed for flow. Let's get tires off the ground and into the landfill, not necessarily recycling or higher use. Most states collect the fees but divert the money. It varies by state to state, but back of the envelope math, and I'm hoping to have something more definitive later, is states collect somewhere between $400 million and $500 million every single year in pre-disposal fees, and about 80% of that goes to completely unrelated circumstances. Not tires, not solid waste infrastructure, they just go to pay for something else. In New Jersey, it's de-icing for the roads. In Washington State, it's the DOT budget. In Florida, a lot of it's rural mosquito spraying. I'm from a county 2 hours east of here. I appreciate rural mosquito spraying, but I'm not sure that when people pay that disposal fee, that's where they think that dollar's going. Most states have fees that have rarely been adjusted. Again, using Florida as an example, that fee was set in 1991. If it just kept up with inflation, it would be 2.5 times higher than it is now. So not only are those fees being diverted, but states and communities are having to do more with less. And then finally, we just have too many systems where it's too easy to get into the system and operate without skin in the game. Sometimes this is true for processors. Most commonly, it's true for haulers. A very typical scenario for a hauler is they don't have to have financial assurance. They don't have to have any real tangible assets. They might not even own the truck that they use. And often it's not a permit, it's a registration that might be a $50 fee and a one sheet of paper. So they don't even really have a permit at risk if they get caught violating the law. As a result, even though we recycle about 80% of our tires, this is very typical. All of these are photos. Some of these are from Florida, some are not. You have a couple processors in there. You can see over there, that processor is actually processing the tires, but not doing anything with them, which sort of defeats the point. And like any good mother, my mother sends me photos from Facebook when her friends find tires dumped in the national forest. So every state has these problems. The challenge is how can we tighten up at the top as much as possible to get tires in the flow and then address the recycling side. But it's not all doom and gloom. I would say particularly in the last 5 years, and particularly actually in the Southeast, there's been a huge amount of progress, and I just want to talk about what we've been able to do and how we've gotten there. So I said every state has similar challenges. The silver lining of that is you can kind of focus on the same areas for each state, even if that law, that regulation, or that practice looks a little bit different. It's transparency, knowing where the tires are going, who the approved service providers are. One of the things that drives me crazy is states won't even post who an approved processor or a tire hauler is. So even if somebody wants to do the right thing and hire a qualified hauler, they don't have that information. And then annual reports just to know where those tires are going and is this system in the state getting better or worse. Accountability, financial assurance, so people actually have money on the line, so if they break the law, the taxpayer's not on the hook to clean it up. And most often, it ends up being the local government that pays for those cleanups. And since you're paying that disposal fee and you're paying for that cleanup, it's double taxation. Governance, where are those tire funds going? Better defining waste hierarchy and then deciding if you want to put incentives in place. I decided to pick on Washington State here because they're the worst of the worst. They collect almost $40 million a year and less than 2% goes to anything tire related, including staff for the state. And then finally, enforcement. And this is one area where the industry has very limited ability to influence. because we can't force good enforcement, especially on competitors. We need community involvement, everything from making sure inspections are happening, that there are actually follow-ups to those inspections, and that when people violate the law, the district attorneys and prosecutors take it seriously and actually do something about it. So I said I was going to talk a little bit about the progress. So focusing in on the Southeast, what I would say is North and South Carolina last year passed 2 laws that are going to put tens of millions of dollars back into their system, money that was previously being diverted. Georgia has both put money back into their system, and if I can put one plug in for whatever state you're for, every single county and municipality in Georgia now, because they put that money back into the system, automatically qualifies for $75,000 every single year for cleanups and amnesty days. So either those small illegal dumps or having those free drop-off days for people who might have the incidental tire. And it just means, as we all know, everybody in the solid waste industry, it's like broken windows, waste begets waste. If somebody starts dumping one place and it never gets cleaned up, it attracts more dumping. So catching those piles while they're small before they grow. And then Alabama's banning whole tire landfilling, and then Tennessee is putting hauler regulations in for the first time ever. And while a lot of progress has been in the Southeast, we're seeing a lot across the country. Very briefly, it's just some of the systems that have worked for us for trying to make change. I would say, advocacy, these can all sort of overlap or operate independently, but in one state, what we found is we had a bill, everybody said they supported it, we couldn't figure out why it sat year after year after year. And so finally, we just had to go in and do a deep dive and figure out there was one log jam in there for one member who had an unrelated concern that was holding up our bill, figure out what he actually cared about, which had nothing to do with tires, it actually had to do with medical marijuana, figure that one out, and then figure out how we could get him off that perch to unlock our bill. The other one was, it might amaze you that sometimes having the right argument does actually work, but in this case, we had a department that, for reasons I can empathize with, they felt like they were understaffed and didn't have enough resources. They weren't interested in implementing a new program, even if it meant fewer cleanups on the back end. So we actually had to figure out, okay, who are all the stakeholders of that department and convert them to get around the department. And then the last one was building a coalition of all the stakeholders involved, where we spent a couple of years all talking over each other because we all had specific things we wanted. And then finally we got to a place where we decided everybody was going to give up a little bit of something to get this bill passed, because 80% was better than 0. And then very quickly, I want to just run through what are some of the existing markets. It might surprise people to know that we actually do more material recovery than we do tire-derived fuel than energy. But speaking of tire-derived fuel, just for awareness, the vast majority of this now goes to cement and pulp and paper kilns. They think of it as a coal replacement product. They like it because it has lower emissions, whether you're talking about carbon, NOx, SOx, or mercury. And then for cement kilns in particular, it's part of the clinker process. And generally for material management, these are some of the consumer markets, very heavy in the garden space, lawn and automotive, track and field and playgrounds, but also advanced asphalts. But more generally, and I have a typo here, it's crumb with a B, not crumb. The important thing is to think of it as a feedstock. This is all size reduction. And so for us, when you get it down to crumb rubber, which just means anything smaller than 1/4 of an inch, it's essentially feedstock for manufacturing. And a great example of this is if you've ever bought a floor mat at any Walmart or Tractor Supply or Target, it was probably manufactured in Northwest Georgia using our crumb rubber, 100% of that rubber base. The only thing that's not recycled material there is the binder. And for us, the selling point is not only is it a recycled material, but it's a steady supply, 1 scrap tire per person per year. And in an age of supply chain disruptions, you can guarantee that supply is both going to be local and American made, so you don't have to worry about disruptions from trade wars or tariffs. One thing I just want to highlight real quick, because this is an industry where you always get somebody coming along saying they have the next new technology that's going to consume every single tire in the entire country, and it's all going to be glorious, and we're never going to have to worry about recycling again. Well, 40 years tells us that hasn't happened yet. So for us, it's also about not only expanding in markets, but innovation within existing markets. So in the first one, for steel. So blast furnaces, like cement kilns, use tire-derived fuel for a long time, but it was just BTUs for them. A lot of steel mills have gone over to electric arc furnaces. They don't need those tires as fuel. However, what we have been experimenting with, and this took place in Alabama, is replacing the pet coke that's used in that recipe for the steel, for the actual production, the chemical production of it, and replacing it with crumb rubber. In a partnership with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management and a local electric arc furnace, we experimented with replacing that pet coke from anywhere between 5 and 30%. And they said the quality of the steel that came out was the exact same as their normal recipe. This one, I'm from 2 hours east of here in a county that when I was growing up had more than 50% dirt roads. So rubber modified asphalt is very popular, but this is an application to use tires on, it can be done with asphalt, but also done with dirt roads. We did this one in Georgia. It's called mechanical concrete. It doesn't have concrete in it. Don't ask me why that's the name, but essentially they use the treads on the tire as a more stable base for a road. In this case, it's actually a high, it's in the middle of a swamp is the not so polite way of putting it, but it creates a longer lasting road base and a more durable road and uses a recycled material. And then of course, it's about getting more tires into the flow. When you move away from passenger tires and truck tires, like to ag tires, mining tires, you'll see that recycling rate is practically zero. The same thing used to be true for bike tires. We now have a partnership with Trek, where in any Trek-owned store in the entire United States, they do free bike tire recycling. So figuring out partnerships for those tires that aren't currently in the system, how do we get them into the system into some sort of beneficial use? And then just briefly, closed loop recycling, one of the questions we always get is, can you turn an old tire into a new tire? The answer is yes, but it's less than 1% of tires that are going into these sorts of uses right now. The technology is there. I will say traditionally people struggle with the economics. Can they do it within environmental permitting? And then for manufacturers of tires, the number one concern is always safety. So for them, they're always looking, can we get material that is consistent size and quality as we would get from virgin material? So there are some tires going back into tires, mostly as carbon black as filler, which is what you see down there, but it's a slow process. So what's next? My focus is to stop thinking about state level and start thinking about regional level, because tires don't stop at state lines. So how does one change in one state impact a state in another one? Tire fees, again, the number one concern I hear from the local level is communities, particularly at the county level, having to take money out of their curbside budget to put it into cleanups or amnesty days, because they're not getting money back from the state from that. So getting that money back to the local governments. Haulers, this is probably the number one source of illegal dumping right now, is either low-end or unregistered haulers. And then this is an emerging one that is really tricky, is used tire dealers, is how do we maintain that market for people who need access to tires that cost a lot less than a new tire, but making sure there's a minimum standard of environmental compliance too. And that's sort of brand new territory. So with that, I will end. What I would say is, and there's resources on this when it goes around too on illegal dumping and health and safety, but on the left, it's a group we're a part of called the Better Play Initiative, focused on recycled rubber, health and safety, and uses particularly in tracks, running tracks, fields, playgrounds. And then on the right, Tire Recycling Foundation, last year for the first time ever, tire manufacturers, recyclers, haulers, and nonprofits all came together to sit at one table together and figure out how can we talk to each other so when tire manufacturers are making one change here, it doesn't change the recyclability at the other end. So basically to break down barriers. All right.
Thank you both. Incidentally, in the state of Florida, the waste tire fees, some of them do go to cleanups and amnesty days. So again, some really good things, not as much towards recycling as we'd like to see, but mosquito control, tire piles many times in the state of Florida, lots of rain, we do have mosquitoes. We do need mosquito control, so a big reason why a lot of that funding does go towards that. as well. But with that, I am going to open it up for questions. Any questions for Dan or Stratton, please, let us know. We'll bring the mic out to you. Yes, let's get us a mic going here. Okay, I'll bring them. Oh, you got it?
I got it, yeah.
Okay.
I was looking for James.
It's like I'm going to do double duty. And I'll bring this, y'all have a mic.
As far as tires go in Tennessee, I work for the University of Tennessee, and we struggle to find where tires go. We're located in Knoxville, Tennessee. Do you know of any? You said that the counties take them. It's kind of new territory for me. We don't know where to send them. If you have any information on that.
Well, we operate in Tennessee, so I'm happy to give you my card. Tennessee is actually a great example of one of those county-led programs and what happens when the funding isn't updated for 35 years. Tennessee is, technically, it's $1 a tire. It's actually like $1.40 a tire, but they added 40 cents, none of which goes back to the counties. So the counties in Tennessee have essentially started to opt out and refuse to take tires, which has created a lot of chaos in the system because you have 35 years of people taking tires to the counties and now they don't know where to take them. And Tennessee, up until recently, I don't think this regulation's in place, but it's going in soon. There's been no even sort of basic registration on haulers. So it's truly a Wild West in Tennessee that, anybody can haul without even registering with the state. Although TDEC has put new regulations in place that will be finalized this year around that.
We have other questions?
Wait, I'm here.
So two very excellent presentations. I learned a lot here today. And thank you for putting a spotlight on tire recycling because it almost never gets talked about. So you mentioned the Tire Recycling Foundation. I'm just curious if they have a policy position on using tires as a fuel or if they're really looking for more closed loop recycling.
I don't think they have a policy on, an official policy on TDF. What I would tell you is right now the challenge with TDF is if that market didn't exist, the only other place those tires would go is landfills. So it's a beneficial use, whether or not you consider it tire recycling. They do have a policy that they are both funding through the Tire Recycling Foundation and through policy pushes to move tire up the food chain. There are a couple different ways to do that. Georgia does grants to local governments that's sort of like demonstration projects. Tennessee does something similar. Utah is my favorite system because that incentive actually doesn't go to us. It goes to the end user. And they just say any end user based on a waste hierarchy of needs for rubber, if you use anything made with crumb rubber, so at the highest end of it, you get a higher reimbursement versus if you go all the way down to TDF, you still get a reimbursement, but it's much smaller. So they just put their thumb on the scale a little bit to move rubber up the food chain.
So one more question. Thank you. I appreciate that. So Dan, I had a question for you. In your presentation, you had that robot dog. I'm just curious, is that like a sniffer? Like what was that? What is that used for?
Yeah, it's similar to the drone. It'll actually pull samples, spot samples, and be able to tell you what's happening at that location that that robotic dog is at. So it's got the GPS on it. So it walks around your site, and it can tell you exactly from a methane standpoint or other compound standpoint what you have there.
Cool. I guess you can't teach a dog new tricks. Cool. Thank you.
Other questions? I have one really quick. Actually, I was going to ask about tires or rubber used in asphalt.
Yes.
What kind of percentages are we seeing? Is that technology growing? Is that a potential growing market?
It is there's a lot of variation at the state level. California has a mandate. We don't typically support mandates because contractors don't like it, but California, 35% of their roads use rubber modified asphalt. What I would say is there's been a technology shift where when rubber modified asphalt, and for those of you who don't know, it's what it sounds like, but it means roads last longer because they have less rutting and cracking. I've talked to the academics who have done this research and asked what is a conservative number for how much longer the roads last, and they said 40% longer than traditional modified roads. It's even longer compared to traditional asphalt. But the technology that originally came around 25 years ago was a hot wet mix, and that required contractors to essentially make an investment of $2 to $3 million to do it. So you really had to have a strong either incentive or a contractor really on board. Now the industry has moved to what's called a dry mix, where all you do is add the rubber to a traditional asphalt mix in a hopper. You know, a hopper will run you less than $50,000, and that's all you need to do. So it's a lot less in terms of financial investment and barriers to technology for contractors to get involved. Now the challenge we have now is the wet mix is already approved by 35 state DOTs. The dry mix is only approved in 4 state DOTs. So we have to do that process all over again.
So how's Florida look in that?
Florida doesn't do much.
I know in the past, and this is a side, back with the wet mix, we used to have problems because it would get so hot in Florida, and there was a big issue there. So I'm assuming they've overcome some of that.
Yeah, it should be, the mix, rubber modified asphalt mixes should be spec'd just like any other asphalt mix to the local conditions, whether it's temperature or rainfall or anything like that.
And then you had a question.
Yeah. Oh, Dan, I had a question for you, because one of the things you sort of alluded to was, regardless of regulations, what I call like community relations. And I'm curious, in your experience, even setting aside if there's a local or state regulation on odor, how much time do people end up spending addressing these issues with communities if they don't take it as a serious issue?
Not much. So that's why I'm a big believer in an environmental management program. When I worked in Chicago, I was in charge of the biosolids program there for the last 15 years of my career. And the last thing I really wanted to do was put in an environmental management program, because part of that is being more transparent, doing public outreach, getting public input. And I would just rather fly under the radar. That's the way I was early on. But I mean, in today's day and age, the public, your neighbors, they want to be involved. They want to, you know, if you're putting in a compost facility and you put in the effort to involve them early on, that's going to be a win for you, because you're going to have a facility that they're approving at its inception, or at least understanding to a certain extent. Yeah.
Well, and I can also say from the state level, it becomes very time consuming, because once we get a complaint, we have to send out an inspector. An inspector goes out and they may do multiple drive-bys. You may go into violations, enforcement, that sort of thing. So yeah, if you don't address it early on, it can become a pretty big deal. Any other questions? Okay.
All right. Well, if you all will join me in thanking our panel. Thank you, Karen, Stratton, Dan. Let me just close this out. I'll send out the proceedings next week. I'm going to go play golf and drink a beer. So, and then, let's see here. Oh,